A billion-dollar merger teeters on the edge of collapse as Chinese investors threaten to walk away from the table. Billionaire CEO Richard Harman's perfectly orchestrated deal crumbles before his eyes when his translator falls ill at the worst possible moment. The janitor mopping the hallway outside the boardroom, a man Richard has passed 1,000 times without a second glance, is about to change everything. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. On the 45th floor of a gleaming Manhattan skyscraper, Victor Ellis paced like a caged lion. The billionaire CEO of Ellis Tech couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this vulnerable. His custom Italian shoes clicked against the polished marble floor of his glass-walled office, each step amplifying the tension crackling through the air. Sweat beaded on his brow as he glanced at the Patek Philippe on his wrist. Just 17 minutes until the most critical meeting of his life. The delegation from Beijing Quantum would be here any moment, and without a translator, the $200 million contract he'd spent 18 months cultivating would disintegrate before his eyes. "Maria!" he barked, causing his assistant to flinch at her desk. "Tell me you found someone." Maria, normally unflappable after 7 years of managing Victor's impossible demands, looked genuinely distressed. "I've called every language service in the city, Mr. Ellis. It's impossible on such short notice. Our regular translator's flight from Toronto is still delayed, and I don't want excuses," Victor snapped, running his fingers through his salt and pepper hair. "I want solutions. This deal represents our entire Asian expansion strategy." Maria nodded, already dialing another number, her 4th attempt with the same premium agency. Victor turned away, staring through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Manhattan skyline he'd conquered. For a man who controlled billions in assets, who could buy and sell companies on a whim, he felt utterly powerless. His phone buzzed. Security downstairs. "Sir, the Beijing Quantum delegation has arrived." Victor's stomach clenched. Through the window, he could see their convoy of sleek Blacktown cars pulling up to the building's entrance. 6 men in immaculate suits emerged, their movements precise, unhurried, radiating the quiet confidence of people who knew their worth in the global marketplace. "They're early," Victor muttered, straightening his tie. "Of course they're early." Maria hung up the phone, her expression confirming what he already knew. No translator was coming. 20 years building Ellis Tech, and it could all start unraveling in the next 15 minutes. His board would crucify him if he lost this deal. The stock would plummet. His competitors would circle like sharks. "Send them to the main conference room when they arrive," Victor said, his voice steadier than he felt. "And keep trying. Someone in this damn city must speak Mandarin and business." As Maria nodded, Victor took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. He hadn't built an empire by surrendering to circumstances. He would find a way through this, somehow. He always did. Inside the gleaming Ellis Tower, the atmosphere crackled with tension. Executives in tailored suits huddled in whispered conferences while assistants frantically tapped at phones and tablets. The news had spread like wildfire. The Chinese delegation was minutes away, and there was no translator. Victor paced across the marble floor, his Italian leather shoes clicking with each agitated step, the sound echoing through the cavernous lobby. Maria, his chief of staff, approached with visible dread etched across her face, clutching her tablet like a shield. "I've called every agency in the city," she said, her voice cracking under the strain. "Everyone's booked solid for the tech summit. We're completely out of options." Victor ran his hands through his silver-streaked hair, the reality sinking in that the most important deal of the quarter was about to collapse before it even began. 28 floors above them, an empty conference room waited with untouched water pitchers and presentation materials that might never be seen. The board members would have his head if this fell through. As the executives began dispersing, shoulders slumped in defeat, a soft voice emerged from near the maintenance area. "Excuse me, Mr. Ellis." The voice was barely audible at first, causing heads to turn toward its source. Standing beside a janitor's cart was a woman in navy blue coveralls, a ring of keys attached to her belt. She stepped forward hesitantly, the fluorescent lights revealing her dark complexion and closely cropped hair. "I couldn't help overhearing," she continued, her voice gaining confidence. "I speak Mandarin. I studied in Beijing for 4 years. If you need someone to translate, I can help." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to the janitor, whose name badge read Tamara Johnson. Victor's expression cycled rapidly through confusion, disbelief, and the faintest glimmer of hope. Everyone in the office froze, turning to stare at the unexpected voice. Lena Brooks, the night janitor, stood in the doorway, mop still in hand, 26, black, with close-cropped natural hair and a quiet confidence that seemed entirely new to everyone present. For 3 years, she'd moved through these halls after hours, practically invisible to the daytime staff who rarely acknowledged her existence beyond the occasional nod. Maria, Victor's executive assistant, stifled an incredulous laugh. "I'm sorry, Lena, but we're in the middle of a crisis here. Mr. Wu arrives in 40 minutes, and our translator just called in sick." "I can translate Mandarin," Lena repeated, her voice steady. "I majored in Chinese language and business at Georgetown. I'm fluent." Victor Harrington's eyes narrowed as he assessed the woman before him. The janitor. Really. His company was on the verge of the biggest deal in its history, and his only hope was the person who emptied his trash can. "This isn't about mopping floors," he said sharply. "This is a $50 million negotiation with technical terms and cultural nuances." Lena didn't flinch. "I understand that." "Sir, prove it," Victor snapped, desperation and skepticism battling in his expression. "Say something. Anything." The room fell silent. Even Maria stopped her frantic typing. Lena set down her mop, straightened her plain grey uniform, and looked Victor directly in the eyes. When she spoke, it was in flawless Mandarin, her tones perfect, her cadence natural and flowing. She introduced herself formally, explained her background in business Mandarin, and offered her services for the meeting with appropriate honorifics and business terminology. Victor's mouth fell slightly open, the fluency, the confidence, the proper business etiquette. It was all there. He'd spent enough time in Beijing to recognize native-level proficiency when he heard it. "Where did you learn to speak like that?" he asked, his voice softer now. "I lived in Shanghai for 3 years after college," Lena replied. "I worked as a business liaison before moving back to the States when my mother got sick." She didn't add that no one would hire a black woman with her qualifications for anything but janitorial work when she returned, not without connections or the right last name. Victor's jaw dropped as he watched Lena speak with Mr. Zhang. Though he couldn't understand a single word she said, there was something unmistakable about her confidence and poise. The perfect pronunciation, the subtle hand gestures, even the slight bow of her head, all of it conveyed a level of cultural fluency that seemed impossible for someone he'd only ever seen mopping floors and emptying trash bins. "What did you just say?" Victor whispered when she finished, his voice barely audible as he leaned toward her, still processing what he'd witnessed. Lena smiled softly, her eyes reflecting a quiet dignity that Victor had somehow never noticed before. "A formal greeting," she explained. "It wishing our partnership mutual success and prosperity in the years to come. I also mentioned how honored we are to host him at our headquarters." There was no pride or smugness in her voice, just the matter-of-fact tone of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. For the first time since Lena had worked in the building, Victor truly saw her. Not as the invisible person who cleaned his office after hours, not as the woman in the grey uniform pushing a cart through the hallways, but as a human being with depths he had never bothered to explore. A brilliant mind that had been hidden in plain sight all this time. Mr. Zhang responded with an appreciative nod toward Lena before turning back to Victor with renewed interest. The tension that had filled the room just moments ago had dissipated, replaced by a cautious optimism. Victor noticed how Mr. Zhang's posture had relaxed, how his expression had softened from one of frustration to curiosity. Victor started, then stopped, unsure what to say. His mind raced with questions. How did she learn to speak Chinese so fluently? Why was she working as a janitor with such valuable skills? What else didn't he know about the people who worked in his own building? The silence stretched between them until Mr. Zhang spoke again, looking directly at Lena. She listened intently, nodding occasionally, before turning to Victor. Mr. Zhang would like to continue the meeting, she translated. He says he appreciates your efforts to accommodate him and looks forward to hearing your proposal. Her eyes met Victor's, and for a brief moment he caught a glimpse of something else there. Intelligence, certainly, but also a hint of amusement at his obvious shock. Maria's heels clicked sharply against the marble floor as she stepped closer to Victor, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You can't be serious. What will the Chinese think? A janitor at the negotiation table. We're talking about a multi-billion-dollar deal, not ordering takeout. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped against her tablet as she scanned the room for support, finding none. Victor watched Lena carefully, noting how she stood her ground despite Maria's cutting remarks. There was something in her eyes, a quiet confidence that seemed out of place for someone who'd been pushing a mop cart minutes earlier. The weight of the decision pressed on him. The delegation would arrive in less than an hour. The translator wasn't coming. The deal that could save his company hung by a thread. We don't have options, Maria, he said finally, his voice firm but tired, unless you've been hiding fluent Mandarin skills along with your obvious talent for creating tension. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room. Maria's face flushed crimson. Victor turned to Lena, making his decision. Or do you have 10 minutes to change? Meet me in the conference room. He pulled out his wallet and handed her his corporate card. The boutique downstairs should have something appropriate. Tell them to rush it. Lena nodded once, accepting the card with steady hands. I'll be ready, sir. She turned and walked toward the door, feeling Maria's glare burning into her back. As the door closed behind her, Victor faced his executive team. I know this is unconventional, he began, cutting off Maria's attempt to interject, but right now I need solutions, not objections. She could sabotage everything, Maria insisted. We know nothing about her except she cleans floors. Victor's jaw tightened. And speaks Mandarin, apparently. Sometimes the most valuable assets are the ones we overlook. He checked his watch. The Zhao delegation lands in 40 minutes. I suggest we all prepare for what might be the most important meeting of our careers, with or without our janitor translator. In the elevator, Lena pressed the button for the lobby, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. 10 minutes to transform from invisible to indispensable. 10 minutes that might change everything. Minutes later, the conference room door swung open, and all heads turned. Lena stepped in, wearing a borrowed charcoal grey pantsuit that fit her surprisingly well. Her hair swept up in a sleek bun, and her posture transformed with quiet power. Gone was the woman who had been pushing a cleaning cart just 30 minutes earlier. The Elistec executives exchanged shocked glances, their whispers barely concealed behind raised hands. Is this some kind of joke? Muttered Derek from marketing to his colleague. Or she was literally emptying my trash can yesterday. Victor cleared his throat loudly, silencing the room. Gentlemen, allow me to introduce Lena Washington, our international consultant who will be assisting us today. His voice carried a forced confidence that couldn't quite mask his own uncertainty. The Chinese delegation stood respectfully as Lena approached. Mr. Huang, the silver-haired leader of the group, studied her with curious eyes. When Lena bowed at precisely the correct angle, Not too deep to suggest subservience, not too shallow to suggest disrespect, his eyebrows raised slightly. Huang Xiansheng Hen Rongxing Jiandao Nin, Lena said, her Mandarin flowing with perfect tones and natural cadence. I hope your flight to Chicago was comfortable. Mr. Wang's formal expression melted into genuine surprise, then appreciation. Your Mandarin is exceptional, Ms. Washington. Where did you study? Beijing Language and Culture University, then 2 years at a tech firm in Shenzhen, she replied, seamlessly switching between languages as she guided them to their seats. The Elistech team watched in stunned silence as Lena not only translated but engaged in cultural nuances they'd never considered, pouring tea for the guests before herself, presenting business cards with both hands, and addressing each delegate by proper title and rank. When Mr. Wong made a subtle joke about international business practices, Lena laughed appropriately while translating the humor in a way that made even the stiffest executives chuckle. Victor's panicked expression had transformed into cautious relief. The woman he'd barely noticed for 3 years was commanding the room with an authority that made his own Harvard-educated presence seem almost irrelevant. As the initial pleasantries concluded and they prepared to discuss the actual business proposal, Victor caught Lena's eye across the table. She gave him a small, knowing nod before turning her full attention back to Mr. Huang. The meeting room transformed as Lena took her position beside Victor. She didn't just translate his words, she breathed life into them. When the Chinese delegation leader made a subtle reference to an ancient proverb about patience, Lena not only translated the literal meaning but added, "This is similar to your American saying about Rome not being built in a day, but with a 5,000-year perspective." The delegates nodded appreciatively, their postures visibly relaxing. "Ask them about their concerns regarding production timelines," Victor whispered to Lena. She translated his question, then added a small cultural flourish about respecting their expertise that made the lead negotiator smile for the first time that day. When one delegate made a joke about American coffee being too weak, Lena responded with a playful quip about Chinese tea ceremonies that had everyone laughing, including Victor, who hadn't understood the original comment. "She's magnificent," breathed Rajiv to Victor. "Where did you find her?" The atmosphere in the room had completely shifted. The Chinese businessmen were leaning forward, engaged and responsive. Their questions became more specific, more technical, a sure sign of genuine interest. Victor caught himself smiling as he watched Lena work. She didn't just know the language, she understood the dance of international business, the unspoken rules, the importance of face and respect. From across the table, Maria watched the proceedings with a tightening jaw. Her fingers tapped an impatient rhythm on her tablet as she observed the Chinese delegates warming to Victor's proposals. When Lena smoothly explained a complex profit-sharing arrangement that had previously been a sticking point, Maria's eyes narrowed to slits. She whispered something to her assistant, who nodded and slipped out of the room. Victor felt a surge of hope as the lead negotiator began asking detailed questions about implementation timelines, the kind of questions that only came when a deal was close. For the first time since the delegation had arrived, he could see a path forward. The weight that had been crushing his chest began to lift, but even as the meeting progressed smoothly, he couldn't help noticing Maria's calculating gaze fixed on Lena. The smile on Maria's face didn't reach her eyes. And Victor recognized the look. It was the same expression she wore before eliminating obstacles in her path. Whatever Maria was planning, Victor knew one thing for certain. The battle for this deal, and perhaps for Meridian's future, was far from over. Just as the mood was beginning to lighten, Maria leaned forward, her saccharine smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Perhaps," she interjected, voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "our esteemed guests would be interested in hearing about Lena's unique journey at Elistech." She emphasized the word unique, with just enough inflection to transform it into something almost derogatory. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Every eye turned to Lena, who felt her stomach tighten. This was Maria's specialty, the artfully crafted barb disguised as innocent conversation. The implication hung in the air. What was a janitor doing acting as a translator in a multi-million-dollar negotiation? Lena took a slow, deliberate breath. She could feel Jack's supportive gaze. But this was her battle. "My journey has indeed been unexpected," she began, her voice steady despite the hammering in her chest. "I came to America with 2 graduate degrees and dreams of continuing my academic career. Life had other plans." She described how the economic downturn had coincided with her arrival, how positions in her field had evaporated overnight, how she'd taken the custodial position at Ellis Tech as a temporary measure that had stretched into years. "I clean offices at night and teach Mandarin classes on weekends," she explained, meeting Maria's gaze directly. "My grandmother always said that honest work builds character, regardless of the title." Mr. Huang, who had been listening intently, nodded slowly. His expression remained unreadable, but something in his eyes had shifted. "In my experience," he said finally, breaking the tense silence that had fallen over the room, "it is not the position that reveals a person's worth, but how they conduct themselves within it." The words hung in the air, like a verdict. Maria's smile faltered slightly as Mr. Huang turned his attention fully back to Lena, effectively dismissing the attempted sabotage. "Please," he continued in Mandarin, "tell me more about your background in linguistics. Your command of regional dialects is impressive." Jack caught Lena's eye across the table and gave her the smallest of nods. The message was clear. She belonged at this table just as much as anyone else. The negotiation continued, but something fundamental had shifted in the room's dynamics. The energy in the room shifted like a sudden change in barometric pressure. Lena could feel it, the Chinese executives exchanging glances, their postures stiffening almost imperceptibly. In their business culture, titles and positions weren't just labels. They were the very architecture of respect. The revelation that she had been mopping floors just days earlier had altered something fundamental in their perception. "You were the cleaning staff?" Mr. Zhang asked, his tone carefully neutral, though his eyes betrayed a recalibration happening behind them. Victor's face had gone pale. Lena recognized that look. It was the same expression he'd worn when he thought all was lost before she stepped in. She could practically hear his thoughts. Everything they'd built toward was crumbling. "Yes," Lena answered with deliberate calm. "I maintained your subsidiary's headquarters for 3 years while completing my advanced studies." She held Mr. Zhang's gaze without flinching. "In China, does one's past position diminish their current knowledge?" The question hung in the air. Lena had spent countless evenings emptying trash bins while executives spoke freely. Assuming the invisible woman couldn't understand their strategic discussions in Mandarin, she remembered every dismissive wave, every time they'd continued sensitive conversations as if she were merely furniture. Mr. Chen, the oldest of the delegation, leaned forward. "In China, we believe the lowliest position often provides the clearest view of the whole house." A proverb. Lena recognized it immediately. Her grandmother had said something similar. "Yet hierarchy exists for a reason," countered Mr. Liu, the youngest executive. "Experience matters." Victor's leg was bouncing nervously under the table. Sweat beaded at his temples as he watched 3 years of relationship building potentially dissolve before his eyes. The contract papers sat untouched at the center of the table. Lena thought of all the times she'd been overlooked, the scholarship committee that had questioned her cultural fit, the professors who'd seemed surprised by her aptitude, the countless job applications that went unanswered despite her qualifications. This moment felt different. For once, her future wasn't being decided in her absence. She was in the room, at the table. "With respect," she said. switching to a formal register of Mandarin that made Mr. Zhang's eyebrows rise slightly. "My understanding of your company comes not from textbooks, but from observation. I've listened as your representatives discussed supply chain weaknesses they wouldn't admit in formal meetings. I've noted which products your teams celebrate privately and which cause concern." A heavy silence fell. The executives exchanged looks that Lena couldn't quite interpret. Victor had stopped breathing entirely, his knuckles white against the polished table. The meeting ended with a tepid handshake and a non-committal, "We'll consider your proposal," from Mr. Zhang. Victor's confident facade crumbled the moment the delegation turned away, his shoulders visibly sagging under the weight of what was clearly a failed negotiation. The other executives exchanged worried glances as the Chinese businessmen filed out, speaking rapidly among themselves. Victor remained frozen in place, staring at the polished conference table where his empire's future had just slipped through his fingers. Without that manufacturing deal, Apex would hemorrhage money for at least 3 more quarters. The board wouldn't wait that long before demanding his resignation. "I need a moment," Victor muttered, waving everyone out. Only Thomas lingered, his expression unreadable as he gathered his notes. "Sir, I think—" "Not now," Victor snapped, then immediately regretted his tone. "Just give me the room, please." In the hallway, the executive team huddled in tense conversation. Maria's lips curled into a barely concealed smile as she adjusted her designer blazer. "Well, that was predictable," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Next time, we'll think twice about who represents us in critical negotiations." Her eyes flicked meaningfully toward the janitor's cart still parked near the conference room door. Several colleagues nodded in agreement, but Lena remained silent, watching the dynamics unfold. For 3 years, she'd pushed her cart through these halls, invisible to the power players who ran past her with their lattes and spreadsheets. 3 years of emptying their trash cans, while they spoke freely, assuming she couldn't understand their strategies, their fears, their secrets. 3 years of observing which executives actually read the reports they demanded. Which ones took credit for others' ideas? Which ones made decisions based on data versus ego? Lena had learned more about Apex's operations than most middle managers knew. She understood the company's vulnerabilities, its untapped strengths, and most importantly, the massive blind spot its leadership had regarding their international strategy. As the executives dispersed, heading back to their offices to update their resumes or plot their next power moves, Lena quietly pushed her cart toward the supply closet. Her mind was already racing ahead, connecting dots and formulating a plan. The meeting had failed, but the game wasn't over, not by a long shot. As Lena grabbed her cleaning cart that evening, the fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows across the empty office floor. Maria's voice carried from the break room, deliberately loud enough for everyone within earshot to hear. "Some people should know their place," Maria sneered to 2 junior executives who laughed nervously. "Scrubbing toilets is all some are qualified for." Lena kept her head down, pushing her cart past the glass-walled conference rooms. But while her hands methodically sorted cleaning supplies, her mind raced with everything she'd witnessed over the past 18 months. The confidential calls she'd overheard while emptying trash bins, the careless emails left open on screens, the secrets whispered late at night when executives thought the building was empty. For months, she'd been keeping meticulous notes in a small leather-bound notebook tucked inside her uniform pocket. Each entry dated and detailed, the questionable wire transfers to offshore accounts, the altered financial reports, the unethical deals negotiated after hours. She documented everything, from exact times and locations to direct quotes. Photographs of documents left carelessly exposed, audio recordings of conversations that should never have happened in her presence. "Hey, janitor!" Maria called out, stepping into the hallway. "When you're done with the bathrooms, my office needs attention. I spilled coffee everywhere." Her smile was venomous, eyes glittering with malice. "Yes, Ms. Hoffman," Lena replied quietly, her expression carefully blank. Maria turned away, satisfied with her display of power. Completely unaware of the evidence trail she'd left behind, she walked with the confidence of someone who believed herself untouchable, who saw the cleaning staff as invisible, as beneath notice. What Maria didn't understand was that invisibility granted Lena access to every corner of the company. While executives guarded their words around each other, they spoke freely in front of the woman they barely registered as human. They left sensitive materials in plain sight, assuming the help couldn't possibly comprehend their significance. Lena's fingers brushed against her notebook as she pushed her cart toward Maria's office. 18 months of documentation, 18 months of being underestimated. Maria, so certain of her own invulnerability, had no idea that her downfall had been meticulously catalogued by the very person she delighted in humiliating. Tomorrow, Lena would put her plan into motion, but tonight, she would clean Maria's office with the same careful attention to detail she'd applied to gathering evidence. After all, thoroughness had always been her greatest strength. Lena's phone buzzed at 11:30 that night as she was reviewing her notes from the day. A message notification lit up her screen, Mr. Huang. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened it. The message was entirely in Mandarin characters, but she understood every word. He was requesting a private meeting tomorrow morning at 8 at the Golden Lotus Cafe, a small establishment known for its discretion and excellent tea. The message ended with a curious phrase that made her breath catch. To discuss future opportunities that might interest someone of your unique talents. She read it 3 times, trying to decipher what lay beneath the polite phrasing. Was this a job offer, a consulting opportunity, or something else entirely? Sleep eluded her as she tossed and turned, imagining different scenarios. By 5 in the morning, she'd given up on rest and instead meticulously prepared, selecting a modest but professional outfit, nothing flashy but dignified enough to show respect. The Golden Lotus was tucked away on a quiet side street, its entrance partially hidden by potted bamboo plants. Lena arrived 20 minutes early, ordered jasmine tea, and selected a corner table with a view of the door. Her hands betrayed her nervousness, slightly trembling as she arranged her small notebook and pen. At precisely 8 o'clock, the bell above the door chimed. Mr. Huang entered, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit. What surprised Lena was the woman who followed him, the stern-faced executive from yesterday's meeting, Ms. Lin. The vice president's presence elevated this meeting to something far more significant than Lena had anticipated. Ms. Walker. Mr. Huang said with a warm smile, extending his hand. Thank you for accommodating my request on such short notice. It's my pleasure, Lena replied in Mandarin, standing to greet them both. Ms. Lin studied Lena with calculating eyes before offering a slight bow. Your performance yesterday was unexpected, she said, her tone revealing nothing of her true thoughts. They settled at the table, and a waiter appeared almost instantly with a fresh pot of tea and additional cups. Mr. Huang waited until they were served before leaning forward slightly. Ms. Walker, I believe in recognizing exceptional talent when I see it, he began, his voice low and measured. What you demonstrated yesterday was not merely linguistic skill, but cultural understanding, quick thinking, and discretion. Ms. Lin nodded. These are qualities our organization values highly. Lena maintained her composure, though her pulse quickened. I'm honored you think so. Mr. Huang exchanged a brief glance with Miss Lin before continuing. We would like to discuss a proposition with you, one that would utilize your abilities in a much more substantial way than your current position allows. The tea ceremony concluded, and Miss Lin set down her cup with practiced precision. Miss Porter, we've been quite impressed with your insights today, but I must confess, Our interest in Ellis Tech extends beyond a simple partnership." Her voice was measured, careful. Lena raised an eyebrow. "I had a feeling there was more to this meeting." Mr. Zhang nodded, exchanging a glance with Mrs. Lin before continuing. "Beijing Quantum is establishing a significant North American presence. We need someone who can bridge our worlds, someone who understands both Eastern and Western business philosophies from the inside." "We're seeking a North American director of operations," Ms. Lin added, her eyes studying Lena's reaction. "Someone who can navigate both cultures authentically." Lena took a thoughtful sip of her tea. "That's quite an undertaking. The cultural nuances alone would challenge most executives I know." "Which is precisely why we're impressed with you," Mr. Zhang said. "Your understanding of our business model showed remarkable depth, and your language skills are exceptional." Lena found herself sharing observations about American corporate culture, the unspoken rules, the power dynamics. "In my experience," she explained, "American executives often mistake aggression for leadership. At Ellis Tech, for instance, I've watched talented people get steamrolled because they didn't play the right political games." She caught herself before mentioning Ellison by name, but her description of toxic leadership practices clearly resonated with the Chinese executives. "That's exactly the perspective we need," Ms. Lin said, leaning forward. "Someone who sees the flaws in the system, but knows how to navigate them effectively." Mr. Zhang nodded. "We'd like to formally offer you the position, Ms. Porter. Triple your current salary, comprehensive benefits, and full relocation support to our Vancouver headquarters." Lena nearly choked on her tea. "Triple?" Ms. Lin smiled. "We've researched market rates thoroughly. We believe this compensation reflects both your value and the significance of the role." Lena's mind raced. This wasn't just a job offer, it was an escape route, a chance to leave behind Ellison's condescension, the daily indignities, the glass ceiling she kept hitting at Ellis Tech. "I'm honored," she said carefully. "This is unexpected, but certainly intriguing. I'd need to consider all the implications, of course." "Of course," Ms. Lin replied. "No, we don't expect an immediate answer. Take the weekend to consider. We'll be in town until Tuesday." As Lena nodded, she felt a strange mixture of exhilaration and uncertainty. This morning, she'd been an overlooked executive assistant. Now, she was being courted for a position that would transform her career and her life. Lena stared at her laptop screen, the blue light illuminating her troubled face in the darkness of her apartment. "One condition," Mr. Zhang had said. Beijing Quantum would hire her, with double her current salary and the chance to lead their American operations. But first, she needed to help them investigate potential contract fraud at Ellis Tech. The suspicions had been circulating for months. Bid rigging, discrimination against Chinese vendors, and kickback schemes. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Loyalty had always been her North Star, but what if that loyalty was misplaced? What if Maria, who'd smiled to her face while dismissing her translation abilities, was corrupt at her core? Lena opened her encrypted folder labeled Insurance, a collection she'd started 3 years ago when she first noticed discrepancies in the international contracts. Email by email, spreadsheet by spreadsheet, a damning pattern emerged. There was the time Maria had rejected the lowest bid from a Shanghai supplier, claiming quality concerns, despite perfect samples. Lena had saved Maria's private email to a college friend's company that ultimately won the contract at 30% higher cost. Then there were the recordings from meetings where Lena was asked to mistranslate terms to Chinese partners, making deals less favorable than what was discussed in English. The most disturbing evidence came from the last 6 months, spreadsheets showing systematic exclusion of Chinese vendors from contract opportunities unless they partnered with specific American consultants who charged excessive fees. In 3 cases, those consultants were shell companies tied to Maria's brother-in-law. My God, Lena whispered, scrolling through file after file. She'd collected this evidence as self-protection, never quite believing she would use it. Now, the weight of what she possessed felt suffocating. This wasn't just office politics or casual racism. This was corporate fraud that had cost millions and damaged dozens of businesses. A text message lit up her phone. It was from Calvin. "You okay? You seemed upset when you left today." Lena's throat tightened. Calvin had always seen her, really seen her, when others looked past. What would he think if he knew what she was contemplating? Would he understand that sometimes justice required difficult choices? She closed her laptop without responding to his message. Tomorrow, she would need to make a decision that would change everything, for Elistech, for Maria, for herself. The evidence was clear, but the path forward remained shrouded in moral ambiguity. Loyalty to a company that never truly valued her, or a chance at justice and a new beginning. The next morning dawned with an air of tension at Meridian headquarters. Victor had called an emergency board meeting for 9 o'clock sharp, and the executive floor buzzed with whispers. Word had already spread through the company grapevine that the Chinese delegation had filed a formal complaint about irregularities during the negotiations. As board members filed into the mahogany-paneled room, their faces were grim with concern about what this meant for the deal, and for their jobs. Maria was the last executive to arrive, deliberately timing her entrance for maximum effect. She strutted into the boardroom, wearing a crimson power suit that seemed to announce her intention to draw blood. Her confidence was palpable as she took her seat at Victor's right hand, shooting pointed glances at the empty chair where Lena would have sat. Maria had spent half the night crafting her narrative, one that would pin the entire fiasco squarely on the shoulders of the absent janitor. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victor began, his voice uncharacteristically subdued, "we face a serious situation that threatens not only the Guangzhou deal, but our company's reputation in the Asian market for years to come." Maria straightened her posture, ready for her moment. "If I may, Victor," she interjected smoothly, rising to her feet, "I believe I can shed some light on how this unfortunate situation developed." She paused for dramatic effect, scanning the worried faces around the table. Yesterday's translation issues were the direct result of... The boardroom door swung open, cutting Maria's sentence short. Every head turned as Lena walked in, not in her custodial uniform, but impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit that rivaled any executive's attire. She carried a sleek leather briefcase and moved with quiet confidence to the front of the room. The board members exchanged confused glances. While Maria's mouth hung open in mid-sentence, Victor nodded at Lena, signaling for her to speak. "Ms. Washington has some information relevant to our current situation," he said simply. The power dynamic in the room shifted instantly. Maria slowly sank back into her chair as Lena placed her briefcase on the table and clicked it open. Whatever was coming next, it was clear the narrative Maria had carefully constructed was about to be thoroughly dismantled. With steady hands that betrayed none of her inner turmoil, Lena connected her tablet to the projector. The conference room fell silent as the screen illuminated with the first piece of evidence, an email chain between Maria and the Human Resources Department discussing how to handle the janitor problem without creating legal exposure. Board members leaned forward in their seats, expressions shifting from curiosity to concern as Lena methodically advanced through her presentation. "This audio recording was captured during a private meeting in Maria's office 3 weeks ago," Lena explained, pressing play. Maria's unmistakable voice filled the room. "I don't care how qualified he is. Find a reason. We can't have someone like him representing us to the Chinese delegation." Several board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Lena continued through her evidence with clinical precision, screenshots of altered schedules, documentation of denied training opportunities, and testimonials from other staff who had witnessed the discrimination. With each new revelation, the temperature in the room seemed to drop another degree. The board chairman removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose as the weight of what they were witnessing settled over the room. "This is absurd," Maria suddenly erupted, slamming her palm against the polished table. "This is nothing but a vindictive campaign of lies from a disgruntled employee who's clearly in league with James. These could easily be fabricated." Lena didn't flinch. "I anticipated that response," she said evenly, clicking to the next slide. "Which is why I've included metadata verification for each document, chain of custody information for the recordings, and sworn statements from 3 witnesses who are willing to testify to what they've seen and heard." Maria's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little—" "That's enough, Maria," the chairman interrupted, his voice heavy with authority. The other board members' faces had grown increasingly grave, their earlier skepticism replaced by something that looked remarkably like conviction. The timestamps on these communications align perfectly with the cancelled Translator bookings," noted one board member, studying the projection through narrowed eyes. Another board member, a woman with silver hair who had remained silent until now, turned to Maria. "These allegations are extremely serious. Do you have any substantive defense beyond claiming fabrication?" Maria's mouth opened and closed, her usual eloquence deserting her as the walls of her carefully constructed narrative began crumbling around her. The truth, methodically presented and irrefutably documented, had left no room for doubt. Victor's voice cut through the boardroom like ice, each syllable measured and precise. "You have 30 seconds to explain why you shouldn't be terminated and reported to authorities." He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, towering over Maria, who remained seated. Her complexion ashen, Maria's eyes darted around the room, desperately searching for allies. Instead, she found only condemnation in the faces of her colleagues. The Chinese executives watched with stoic expressions, while the American board members couldn't hide their disgust. Even those who had once laughed at her jokes now averted their gaze, unwilling to be associated with her disgrace. "This is ridiculous," Maria stammered, her voice trembling. "I was only trying to protect the company from—" "From what?" Victor interrupted. "From someone more qualified than you, from diversity that frightens you. Your time is up, both literally and figuratively." With a subtle nod from Victor, the boardroom door opened. 2 security guards entered, their presence commanding immediate attention. One of them stepped forward. "Ma'am, we need you to collect your personal belongings and come with us." Maria rose slowly, her designer suit suddenly seeming to hang awkwardly on her frame. The room remained deathly silent as she gathered her tablet and purse. When the security guard reached for her elbow, she yanked it away. "I can walk myself out." As the group moved toward the door, Maria suddenly stopped beside Lena, her face contorted with a final burst of venom. "You'll never belong here," she hissed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're just a charity case, a janitor playing dress-up." Lena met her gaze unflinchingly. The room held its collective breath, waiting for her response. When it came, her voice was quiet but carried to every corner of the room. "I belong wherever I choose to stand," Lena said simply. "And right now, that's here, doing work that matters. Can you say the same?" Maria's face flushed crimson. She opened her mouth to retort, but the security guard gently guided her forward. "Ma'am, please." The boardroom door closed behind them with a soft click that somehow sounded like finality. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then Mr. Zhang said something in Chinese, and several of his colleagues nodded in agreement. "He says," Wei translated with a small smile, "that sometimes the trash takes itself out." Victor watched Lena from across his office, a newfound respect in his eyes. "I've been thinking," he said, leaning forward in his chair. "We need someone with integrity to lead our international relations division, someone who understands that business is about building trust, not just making deals." He paused, studying her reaction. I want you to take the position, Lena. Director of International Relations. Lena felt her breath catch. Just 3 weeks ago, she'd been invisible to these people. Are you serious? She asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Dead serious, Victor replied. What you did with the Huawei team, that wasn't just good translation, that was leadership. You saved this company millions when you could have let us crash and burn after how Maria treated you. Lena straightened her shoulders. I'll accept on one condition, she said, surprising herself with her boldness. I need autonomy to build my own team based on skill, not pedigree. Victor nodded without hesitation. Done. Within days, Lena moved into her new office. Ironically, Maria's former space. She wasted no time implementing changes. Her first act was establishing a blind recruitment process where applicants' names, backgrounds, and education were temporarily masked during initial evaluations. Skills and problem-solving abilities became the primary criteria. The Chinese deal was salvaged and expanded. Mr. Zhang personally requested that Lena oversee all future negotiations, telling Victor, we trust her. She speaks with honesty. Not just our language. By month 3, Elistech's global partnerships had increased by 30%. Lena's team became known for their innovative approach to cross-cultural business relationships. She hired 3 former maintenance staff with language skills that had gone unnoticed, including Jamal, who now headed their Middle Eastern division. You've transformed this place, Victor told her during their quarterly review. Our reputation is healing. Investors are returning, Lena smiled, remembering the woman who once trembled before speaking in meetings. I just created the environment I wished existed when I started here, she said, where someone like me could be valued from day one. As she walked through the office that evening, she passed the maintenance closet where she'd once hidden to cry after Maria's humiliations. She paused, touching the door briefly. Grateful for the journey that had brought her here, not despite the obstacles, but because overcoming them had shown her exactly what kind of leader she needed to become. 6 months later, Lena found herself staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows of her executive office. The same skyline she once admired while emptying trash cans now spread before her like a kingdom. The city lights were just beginning to twinkle as dusk settled. Her phone buzzed for the 5th time that hour, this time a delegation from Seoul requesting a meeting next week, joining the already scheduled visits from Tokyo and Mumbai. Everyone wanted FaceTime with the woman who had not only saved Elistech from international embarrassment, but had subsequently engineered 3 successful joint ventures across Asia. Ms. Johnson, your mother's calling. Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. Lena smiled, picking up immediately. Hey, Mama, how was physical therapy today? The private rehabilitation center she'd enrolled her mother in had been working wonders. With the comprehensive insurance package that came with Lena's new position, plus her salary that was 20 times what she'd earned as a janitor, her mother's medical care was no longer a source of stress, but a success story in progress. Between meetings and international calls, Lena attended night classes twice weekly. Working toward her master's in international business, her professors often used her own career trajectory as a case study. Last month's Forbes issue featuring 30 under 30 business leaders reshaping America had placed her photo prominently with the headline, "From mop to boardroom, the woman who speaks the language of global business." Ellis himself had become her unlikely mentor. Their weekly lunches now a company tradition. He'd confessed recently that her rise had taught him more about leadership than 40 years of corner office politics. The company's stock had risen 18% since the Chinese partnership, and employee retention had improved dramatically under what the business press called the Johnson approach, a management style that recognized talent regardless of title or background. As Lena ended the call with her mother, She glanced at the framed janitor's badge she kept on her credenza, a reminder of where she'd started and the invisible workers who kept the company running after hours. She'd instituted a company-wide tuition assistance program and language learning initiative available to all employees, from executives to maintenance staff. 17 employees had already enrolled, including 2 night janitors who were studying Mandarin. Across town, Maria sat alone in her cramped studio apartment, staring at the 20th rejection email of the week. The walls seemed to close in on her as she scrolled through job listings that once would have been beneath her consideration. 6 months had passed since her spectacular fall from grace at Ellis-Tech, and her name had become toxic in the corporate world. Every rejection letter arrived with the same polite phrasing, but Maria knew the truth. No company wanted to hire the executive who had become the cautionary tale of workplace arrogance. She glanced at her phone, noticing another LinkedIn notification about Ellis-Tech's expansion into 3 new Asian markets. The deals Lena had secured that fateful day had catapulted the company into unprecedented growth. Maria's stomach twisted with the bitter knowledge that she could have been part of that success if she hadn't been so dismissive of the woman she'd seen only as the cleaning lady. Meanwhile, at Ellis-Tech headquarters, Lena walked confidently through the executive floor, nodding to colleagues who greeted her with genuine respect. Her new office, with a nameplate reading Lena Washington, Director of International Relations, overlooked the city skyline. On her desk sat a framed photo from her first official business trip to Beijing, standing shoulder to shoulder with CEO Richard Ellis and their Chinese partners. The company newsletter featuring her story had gone viral beyond Ellis-Tech, inspiring countless others who felt invisible in their workplaces. Richard had implemented her suggestion for a company-wide language learning program, and enrollment had exceeded all expectations. Employees from every department were discovering hidden talents and perspectives among their colleagues. Lena's phone buzzed with a message from her daughter. "Mom, my professor wants you to speak to our business ethics class next month." She smiled, remembering how she'd once worried about providing a good example for her child. Now her journey had become a case study at the same university where she'd earned her degree while working nights. As she prepared for her afternoon meeting, Lena reflected on the path that had led her here, the years of studying languages while others slept, the dignity she'd maintained while being overlooked, the preparation that had allowed her to seize her moment when it finally arrived. She had never needed anyone's permission to be extraordinary, only the opportunity to show what she had always been capable of. And now, as she gathered her materials and headed toward the conference room where executives awaited her guidance, Lena knew with absolute certainty that no one would ever mistake her for just the janitor again.